Welcome to Bed Crime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T, and if true crime is your jam, and like me, you enjoy delving into unsolved cases, trying to figure out who done it, please consider subscribing. Also, if you enjoy my videos, please hit that like button. After hearing what the Wells neighbor, Andy Bernard, told Piper of crowdsourced illuminations about his ex, Jodi Sue Brown, and the bit in particular about Jodi Sue allegedly failing to tell him that after each of her internal radiation treatments, she was supposed to isolate for a number of days, I decided I needed to look at this further. She did that to ensure that she didn't expose Andy or their two kids to small amounts of radiation that she could have been giving off after the treatments. I began thinking back to Jodi Sue's description of June 15th, 2021, the day Summer Wells went missing. Andy's story, if true, may tell us some things about that June day. Andy said that when he found out about the need for isolation after the radiation treatments, he had a small cabin either placed or built on the property so that Jodi Sue could isolate in it after those treatments. Now, if we go back to one of Jodi Sue's early videos about the case, the video entitled Summer Number 9, she describes the day Summer disappeared in terms of what she and her kids were doing during those critical hours. She also describes the sights and sounds they heard from their perch up on the hill ridge across from the Wells property at 110 Ben Hill Road. Jodi Sue talks about being on edge that day, hyper aware of her surroundings because of the Jackie Dobbs situation. Dobbs had shown up on their property the day before and had gotten into an altercation of sorts. The police were even called out. But on June 15th, Jodi Sue says that she was in her isolation cabin. This indicates to me that she likely had a radiation treatment just before the 15th. I mean, that's why Bernard got the cabin, and that would be the only reason that I can think of why Jodi Sue would be in the cabin and not in the house. Take a listen.
So, the kids and I were in the cabin. The doors open, the windows open, no TV or anything going. For the most part, the cabin itself was pretty empty. I had a bed in there, fish tank, that type of thing, you know. But it was actually a pretty good feeling day, so air conditioning wasn't on, anything like that. Felt pretty nice. And at the time, it hadn't been, and it still wasn't last I knew, just a few days ago, insulated or drywall up or anything. So, you could basically, you know, and it was a different angle than the house, so sounds were a little different to it than, say, the house was. And it was a little closer to Candace's than the house. So, I'm at the head of the bed, safe like you were up towards your headboard, and in the middle, I was kind of in that area of the bed. My oldest was to my left, but around where, like, if you were sitting Indian style at your headboard, he was kind of to my left and down a little past where knees Indian style would be. And my daughter was towards my feet and to the left and closest to the cabin door.
Knowing what Bernard said about the risk of radiation exposure to those in close contact with Jodi Sue after her treatments, and assuming that that's true, I find it strange that the kids are inside the cabin with Jodi Sue on the 15th. Why would the kids be inside with her if the whole point of the cabin was to create a shelter for Jodi Sue in which to be alone? Did she ignore the doctor's warnings about radiation exposure when Bernard was away? Or did she think that because the doors and windows were open, the risk to her children would be minimal? Was Jodi Sue in the cabin even though she didn't need to isolate and maybe had not had a treatment? Did you hear Jodi Sue say that the doors were open, the windows were open, there was no AC on, no fan, no TV, and the cabin was pretty empty aside from the bed and a fish tank? It was not insulated, there was no drywall. It was closer to the Wells property than the house. She also says later that the tree cutters had left. What Jodi Sue's doing here is letting us know why she and her 2 kids were able to hear the alleged scream. She's making it clear that the 3 of them were in a place and a situation where they could hear every noise in the hollow and see certain things like a flash of red going up the Wells driveway or hear a car door slammed. So when she later mentions the scream that occurred sometime between 4:30 and 4:42 p.m., we know exactly why the 3 of them picked up that strange sound, even though no one else in the hollow apparently did. Now, I'm not saying Jodi Sue is lying. Whether she's telling the truth or making it all up, she would have had to set up the scream like that either way. She'd have to explain why the 3 of them were able to hear that strange noise. I'm not out to get Jodi Sue here. I'm just trying to get a closer look at her recollections and see how her version of events fits with what Andy Bernard told Piper. Of course, we don't know if Bernard was telling Piper the truth, so it's all hearsay. But it's interesting to take his information and see how it colors what Jodi Sue has said. Note that we also don't know if what Jodi Sue has said is true either. We have to take everyone at their word. But let's just speculate for a second. Remember, according to Sheriff Ronnie Lawson of the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, everyone involved that day is still a person of interest, and that includes Jodi Sue Brown and her children, just by nature of them being there in Beech Creek that day and hearing and seeing what they say they did. Sheriff Lawson has also said that the scream Jodi Sue and her kids claim to have heard is unfounded. Now, all along I've believed Jodi Sue about the scream, but now I just want to speculate a little and consider the possibility that there was no scream that day. Could the scream that Jodi Sue and her 2 kids claim they heard on June 15th between 4:30 and 4:42 p.m., the sound so strange that it shut them all down cold while all 3 of them were hanging out together inside the cabin where Jodi says there was no AC, no fan, yada yada yada? Could that scream have been made up? Could all of these details be Jodi Sue's way of establishing an alibi, not just for herself, but also for her 2 kids? I mean, the 3 of them can attest to being together the entire afternoon on June 15th, right? But no one else can verify that, probably, because Jodi Sue and her son and daughter were up on their part of the hill, ridge, whatever you want to call it, by themselves. Andy Bernard, we've been told, was at work, and supposedly there's video footage to prove it. So he can't say for certain if Jodi Sue and his kids were together with eyes on one another that entire afternoon. What do you guys think? Does this story about Jodi Sue and her kids hanging out together in the exceptionally quiet cabin that day ring true? Or could it have been made up and described in such great detail by Jodi Sue to establish a nice, solid alibi for her and her 2 kids? Let me know in the comments. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now, if you haven't yet done so, please hit that like button. Please leave me a comment. All of these things are great ways to support my channel.